And we're back for one more. I'm going to change the narrative from the discussion from what we previously talked about, which is typically we're talking about the trans ideology moving forward, the attack on families, and we're going to be talking about housing. And there was a recent post by by the White House talking about the Biden and Harris administration announces action to lower housing costs and boost supply. Of course, people are complaining about the cost of housing, the cost of rent going up, and it's well, the government gave people a bunch of money. People didn't have to pay for their rent, their electricity, their cell phone for a better part of 2 months. I mean, shoot, in places like in California and in LA, there's still a moratorium to this day where people are not paying rent. And so what it does is it pulls individuals who may want to go and buy real estate and then offer it up for rent not to. And so what happens, right? The supply goes down. The supply of people willing to offer that service goes down. But the demand doesn't go away. You still have a lot of people that are in need of housing. I believe it was something like 50% of all millennials ended up moving back home during, it was either 2021 or 2022. So there's a huge demand for houses. Pushing the government into housing is just going to create more shortages because it will just become more expensive. Because what can the government do? Is the government going to go out there and start building houses? No. They don't have that skill. The only thing the government can do is print money, raise and lower interest rates, and confiscate property. Typically, they don't do that. Usually, the route that they go is loans, giving people loans and lowering and raising interest rates and trying to enact some laws for equity. All that does is create inflation and more shortages. And looking at what they talk about, we're going to discuss some of that. It says it launches first of its kind program to address land use and zoning barriers that limit housing. Now, of course, the government has an incentive to keep housing prices high and to keep the number of houses low. The reason being is because of taxation, right? You pay real estate tax. And much of the loans that are issued are based off of the assessment of the home. So if home values drop, people are more likely to turn those houses back into the banks because they become underwater on their homes, unless that person tends to stay there for the rest of their life. If you plan on being there to the day that you die, but most people don't. I believe the average homeowner lives in their home for about 8 years before moving. So most people don't want to go that route, and the government doesn't want to see deflation, especially because you have taxes paid, real estate taxes that pay for typically for schools. So the local government extracts resources based off of the price of the home. So if the price of the home goes down, that means the taxes are going to go lower. Obviously, they don't want their yield. The government doesn't want what they're yielding from the people to go down. They don't want deflation. They want inflation. So the government is more prone to keep prices high, which is why they give out loans, 30-year loans, 40-year loans, etc., and the price of the home just balloons sky high, and then less people can afford homes, more people get shoved in as renters. And because the amount of homes are held in a small number of people's hands, well, then that limits the flow of the market and finding the price, right? Discovery. When you have less people who are controlling all the resources, there's less discoverability because there's less competition. So the government getting involved is not going to help any of that. As you just look at anything that the government does, just look at the VA, look at the DMV, right? Look at city hospitals. Whenever the government gets involved in anything, it leads to disaster and shortages. So it goes on to state here, it says their goal is to reduce barriers to build housing like restrictive and costly land use and zoning rules. Expanding financing. What does that mean? If more people have more money for homes, the prices of the homes can only go higher. As more people have access to loans to pay the price, well, then there's no incentive for the price to come down, right? Because the government is artificially keeping the price higher. Not to mention, most treasuries are backed. You have mortgage-backed securities. A lot of that is basically what the whole economy stands under. It's their ability to print money. Promoting commercial to residential conversion opportunities, particularly for affordable and zero emissions housing. As the government puts more laws and more regulations, as it talks about here, right? The cost of converting a commercial from commercial to residential, who will that cost be passed on to? That will be passed on to the people who are looking to buy or the people who are looking to rent. Then it makes another statement talking about going for zero emissions housing. That's another regulation, right? Because the government will state what constitutes zero emissions. Well, they're going to have the people who build the homes or the people who do the contracting work from going from commercial to residential. They're going to say, well, you're going to have to meet this quota. That's going to cost more money. Who's going to be responsible for paying that money? Do you think the contractors are? The people who own the property? Is going to be the people who are either trying to buy or the people who are trying to rent. Those are the people. So as the government gets involved and creates these different narratives about what they want to do, later on they talk about recent data show that inflation in rental markets is decelerating and more apartments are on track to be built this year than any year on record. The problem with the narrative of decelerating, it's like you're driving a car. You're driving a car at 50 miles an hour, but now you're going 40, you're going 30. You're decelerating, but you're still moving forward. And that's the exact same thing that's happening with inflation. Even though inflation isn't running, let's say, at 50 miles an hour, now it's only accelerating at 40 and then 30. It's still going higher. The prices are still moving higher. They're just not moving higher as quickly. And this is basically what that statement means. It's under the guise of misrepresenting, talking about, oh, inflation is coming down, like prices are coming down. Prices are not coming down. The rate at which prices are moving up is coming down. The prices are not coming down. And this is basically how they try to use certain language to fool people. Anyway, moving forward, it goes on to state, for example, jurisdictions participating in the American Rescue Plan whole program will produce at least 20,000 units of quote-unquote affordable housing and support an additional 23,000 households with rental assistance, non-congregate shelter, or supportive services, right? Non-congregate shelters or supportive services. So this is what they're going to do. Again, this is not necessarily, you're not going to be around the people that you're going to want to be around. These are typically going to be overwhelmingly the poor and degenerate, the lower rungs of society. Now, of course, they might have some place to live, but it doesn't mean that those people are going to want to live there. We don't know what the quality of those homes. Typically, just look at project buildings, right? This is where most of those people are going to live. And the overwhelming problem is there aren't enough people who are building houses. There aren't enough people with the skill to do it. And most importantly, government is involved to help keep prices elevated. The concept of, well, we're going to give people loans and we're going to make it equal, right? So all these people have access to a loan. Everybody can go out and buy a home. What those homes will look like that you can buy with that loan, I mean, shoot, I look in Pittsburgh and I look at some of these homes that are basically dilapidated. They're almost to the point where they need to be torn down and rebuilt. And they want in Pittsburgh and it's not just this one home. There's sometimes where you'll walk and there are several homes on the same block that are just basically boarded up. And they're like, yeah, we want 150,000. We want 200,000 for these homes. Why? Because they know the government will come in with some sort of a loan. So it keeps prices artificially high. What happens is these homes become too expensive for them to be repaired, because if the home prices, as the prices of homes go higher, so does the price of fixing those homes go higher. So does the cost of the labor. So does the cost of the materials. And people thinking, well, we're going to get a deal. The government's going to come in and they're going to do us this favor because they're going to make things more equitable. What you're going to end up with are being in neighborhoods where overwhelmingly these people are dependent upon the government for everything. And in essence, the government owns those homes. The reason the government needs to do this is because they need to continue to create inflation so that the dollar remains relevant, realistically speaking. From the standpoint of you're a B-list celebrity and maybe you throw out a sex tape, it keeps your name on people's minds and out of people's mouths so that you remain relevant. If the government doesn't give money overseas, or if it doesn't give money to the people, well, then that's less money that can be utilized overseas. But of course, the government wants the ability for those dollars to go overseas so that the people in America can buy stuff from overseas, right? America doesn't manufacture much. They're a consumer economy. They don't manufacture things. That's how they don't get their money, right? We're not creating products and services and then distributing and selling those overseas. What we distribute overseas that brings in money for the country is debt. So people buy treasuries. People will buy treasuries. Money is coming into, you're buying our debt. That money is coming into the country. And of course, they need that money to go overseas to buy stuff so that the dollar remains relevant. If the people cannot get dollars overseas because basically the whole system is built off of a global fiat currency, then maybe they'll use something else. And this is the point. This is why they had to go the way that they did of breaking up homes. We don't need strong, intact homes. We need everybody separated. Instead of you living with your wife and your kids all living in the same home, and maybe your grandparents, etc., are living in your house, everybody has their own home. What does that do? Causes the prices of everything to go higher. That allows the government to print more money. That raises the GDP. And GDP is just, what do the goods and services cost in your country? Obviously, if you create inflation, then the cost of those goods and those services are going to go higher. It's a way to manufacture that your economy is doing so well. Look at our GDP. Our GDP is so high, but so is the cost of living. This is why this is what people base things. It's all based off of. It's all smoke. It's just basically smoke and mirrors. It's all a big lie. It's all a big lie. But it's the only thing that most people have access to. It's the only system in essence that we have, and so people use it. But at the end of the day, for people thinking that the government getting involved in housing is going to create more houses, when their incentive is to create inflation and to keep the prices of houses higher so that people will continue to take out loans. And they'll put out 30-year loans, 40-year loans, 50-year loans, 100-year loans, just to keep the currency relevant. Because it's just basically a pyramid scheme. They need people to come in on the backside to prop the system up. This is what the stock market is built out of. This is what the housing market is built out of. It's just basically the concept of the greater fool. Because everything is speculative. Housing is speculative. The stock market is overwhelmingly speculative. This is why you see people moving out of companies that pay dividends and moving into companies where 10 years down the road they're going to make money. And you see companies like Tesla, right, that produce such a small fraction of automobiles, but literally have a higher worth than almost all the American companies combined. It's just a giant Ponzi scheme. But at the end of the day, when this goes away, when this collapses, and the only reason that they're doing this is because if they didn't, it would all come crumbling down. And so the government is preparing. This is why you're seeing the use of a central bank digital currency. This is why during the pandemic, they were pushing for global passports. This is why they signed in global passport. This is the point of them talking about, we're going to reduce people's ability to travel. We're going to have eye scans so you can get your UBI. They realize that the system is going to collapse, and they're going to put in place all the things that are necessary for the government to, as they say, seize the means of production. This happened during COVID, when the government told people, you can't evict people. This is what communism is, where in essence the government owns everything. And most people who own their home realize that they really don't own their home. It's owned by the banks, which is just an extension of the government. This is what communism is. This is what communism, where the government literally owns everything. And the way that they do that is by indebting you. They indebt you, they own you, right? Just like the Bible says, right? The borrower becomes a slave to the lender. And since the entire system is built off of lending, and everybody is in essence borrowing, because all that we're getting paid with is we're getting paid in debt, that is why everybody is a slave. They're a debt slave. Anyway, I'm going to leave the link for this below. Let me know what your thoughts are. Do you think that housing prices are going to come down? I don't see it happening. I'm in the market for looking for a particular type of home, typically a multifamily or something that I could renovate, where I can have other people either renting out a room or using it for travelers, for travel nurses, etc. Every time I see a remotely decent deal, it gets scooped up. And many of the other deals that I see look like crack houses for $200,000. In Pittsburgh, of all places. Pittsburgh's not exactly where people want to move to. People aren't like, it's not Florida. It's not California. It's not Texas. It's Pittsburgh. And even in Pittsburgh, I'm seeing homes that look like they're homeless people in there, where you have to worry about something falling on your head from the ceiling. And these people are like, I want $200,000 for that. There was a guy who bought a home, and I was looking at it because it was in a good location, but the home was in disrepute. It was completely in disrepair. It required, I want to say, at least $100,000 when I've spoken to other contractors. It looked like at least another $100K just to bring it to market. The guy bought it for under $100,000. I think he bought it for $95,000 3 months ago, and put it on the market for $185,000. And I believe it sold for $180,000. It is what it is. This is the route that we're going. Socialism always ends the same way. Socialism slowly moves towards communism. And when there are shortages, the government steps in to seize the means of production, whether that's housing, businesses, etc. This is why during COVID, you destroy the mom and pops, and then that market share goes to the bigger businesses, right? Like the Amazons, etc., the Costcos. Why? Because it's easier for the government to control a few people than it is to control tens of thousands of business owners. It's easier if Costco, Walmart, Amazon, etc. are your only options. Then it's much easier for them to take control, and they can pseudo take control of these organizations. The government doesn't have to come in with guns and confiscate your stuff. They just have to create the scenario where they have control. That is what communism is. A lot of people may not understand that, but this is what we're slowly moving towards. As I've always said, America's been a socialist nation longer than I've been alive, for the better part of 100 years. And it always ends the same way. Sooner or later, people fall into poverty, and the government turns into an authoritarian. And what you end up with is communism. Anyway, leave your comments below. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll check you next time.